I believe that the traditional consulting model is dying. I was going to say dead, but there's still some part of it. And in my opinion, I think it's actually on its last legs right now. And I know that is a crazy proclamation. Like, why would somebody say something so heinous? But I think that the traditional consulting as we know it, right? Hire a bunch of, hire a consulting firm, and you see the consulting firm send a bunch of analysts to come in and basically sit around and bill you, I don't know, $300, $400, $500 an hour, whatever the number is, just to come up with a pitch deck or a PowerPoint slide or an advice on how to get things done. I think that model is dying. Now, I used to, there's this video of Steve Jobs when you go back several years ago where I think he was giving a speech somewhere and he asked if there are any consultants in the room. And I think a bunch of people probably put their hands up because we cannot see them. We can only see him because the camera was focused on him. And he said, too bad for you guys. I mean, it's a funny video. I mean, you can go and find it online or whatnot. But I think the world is changing so much and so fast right now that I think consulting is the one industry that has not been disrupted for a very, 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 very long time. And I think that is about to stop. And I think consulting companies probably already see that. Maybe a bunch of them can't see it yet, but I think it's coming, especially when it comes to consulting as it relates to working with like traditional corporations and whatnot, right? Especially when it comes to strategy and implementation. And I'm saying this maybe because this is my space, this is my field, but I think that is changing. Now, when you think about consulting, right? There's so many things that, and I'm speaking from somebody who I've done consulting work too. So I've worked in some of, it, a couple of consulting firms. Now I've worked also one of the big ones, which I'm not going to say their name, but it's, it's really, it's more about billable hours. Now, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to criticize and say, well, that's not true. Yes, it is because I've been in there, right? Because sometimes companies hire them to come in and hoping they're going to solve the problems. But what they pretty much do is, now I'm not saying that what they do is completely garbage or rubbish. I think what they do it's important, right? There's some necessary aspects to it, but I think it's just been strung along way too much. What I'm saying is you bring a consulting firm to help you figure out a direction or help you figure out a solution to a problem and maybe something that they could do for a month. They will drag it along and takes 6 months just to do discovery on something, right? And companies are paying for it. Now, sometimes you may say, why are companies paying so much money? Because I've spoken to so many executives who say, especially now with companies still trying to figure out their AI strategy. And I remember one time I was talking to this director for a retail company, actually. I wouldn't say their name either, but she was telling me that they actually brought in a consulting firm. And she said her words were a very expensive consulting firm, that they charged them a lot of money. And it's been months now, and they're still trying to figure out what direction it is. And not that they cannot figure out what direction they needs to go, is because they're getting paid by the hour a lot, right? So most of the time they get paid by the hour. And what are the incentives for them to come in and solve your problem in a week or in a month? It can only take a month. It can only take a month. They will drag it along for 6 months. Sometimes you see a 5 months, 6 months discovery. Discovery of what? Discovery is just coming in there, talking to a bunch of, whether it's employees or managers or directors or VPs, that you're trying to figure out the company, like trying to discover like how the company works, the company's infrastructure and function. I think it's ridiculous. I think we're getting to the point where companies are going to realize they're paying way too much because AI is coming in now. The day when or the time when consulting companies used to have the keys to the castle, or they used to have the secret code to information is gone, because there is nothing proprietary or nothing that they can provide or produce that companies cannot produce themselves. And you're still gonna have them. People are still gonna be out here getting them, using them to, solve their problems or whatever. And I think the reason why companies do that, it's more about the CYA, like cover your ass, because think about it. How many times, for anybody who's listening to this and has worked in corporate America or is working in corporate America, how many times has your company brought in a consulting firm and you guys sit in the back and complain, like, why are they even here? They're not doing anything new, or they're not showing us anything useful. Like, you're basically criticizing their being there. It's because they are not doing anything that you guys cannot do yourself. And the reason why your managers or your VPs get them to come in is because if something doesn't work, which a lot of times they fail, something doesn't work. Like, if they come up with these beautifully presented PowerPoints and give people directions that they don't even get to implement themselves unless you're willing to pay more to implement, which takes a lot longer. So you're basically paying them to go do research and come into you and say, okay, we've done our research. Here's what we think. Now you have AI to do that for you. As a matter of fact, they're using AI for that now. That's why, if you remember, what is it? Was it Deloitte? Deloitte in 2024 that was forced to pay back $98,000 of the $440,000 to the Australian government because they used AI to come up with some report, and the report had a lot of like faulty information in it, false references or whatnot. Same thing happened to Canada, right? I think it was a health report in Canada where the same Deloitte in that same 2024, like a month after the incident in Australia, where they had to, I think they had a fine or something to pay back some money because they could not, because they had a faulty report with false references and whatnot. So they're already doing that. They're doing that right now. So basically, you're paying them to do the work that you can do yourself. So I just think I think the industry is ripe for them to be disrupted, and it should be. Now, it's easy to say, but well, I'm sure you're saying now, but well, if we get rid of them or we don't bring them in, how do we get to, implement things that, or figure out what strategies, like, for example, right? I was talking to this director of AI strategy and was talking about how they were probably thinking about bringing in a consulting firm to help them strategize on that. And my thing is, you don't need them. You really don't need them, because it's a lot better if you can come up with a strategy yourself with the help of AI, because that's what they're going to do to you or do for you. And you're going to pay them $300, $400 an hour to do that for the next 6 months. And you end up with a $300,000 bill, when you can go to AI and ask AI on the perfect strategy based on your existing workflow, existing infrastructure, and the data that you have. Now, here's my recommendation that I put in front of them. And it's simple. It's 3 steps. And I don't think you need more than that. You need 3 steps, because the one thing you want to do is come up with a strategy and let the employees in the house follow, like implement them themselves, right? So there are 3 strategies. I have the playbook strategy, I have the catalyst, and I had the handoff. So it's basically 3 steps, right? The playbook, the catalyst, and the handoff. So what is the playbook? The playbook is basically, that's the part where you get to design a playbook that fits your particular company or industry or infrastructure in place or domain, right? And how do you go about it? That's why you have AI. Use AI and talk to AI about, your existing conditions, your existing situation. This is what we have as far as infrastructure, data, people, whatever it is, right? Craft a beautifully laid out prompt, or a prompt, right? Just a better way to call it. And you ask AI to design a great, like a really reasonable or perfect or great, if you will, playbook in terms of AI strategy. So let's say the goal is to, implement, bring AI into your existing workflow, and AI would design a playbook for you. Now, when AI designs that playbook, you can use your team to review the playbook, of course, because AI can make mistakes here and there, but it gives you a great starting point, a great template for you to look at and review, and maybe say, okay, you know what, maybe we take this off, maybe we'll put this in, take this off, put this in, clean it up this way. It might take, let's say it takes 2 months. I don't think you can take 2 months because AI has already done the work for you, but let's say it takes 2 months or even a month. Now, these are going to be reviewed by people that you already pay. So, and also they will look at it with from a lens of people who already know what's going on within the company. And that way they will know what things to fit in and what things to take out. And that is basically it. That is something that can be done actually within a week, if you ask me. It's actually within a week, but you're going to pay a consulting firm $250,000 to $300,000 to do just discovery on that alone. Meanwhile, they're going to go to AI and pull that up in a few minutes or in a couple of hours. Let's say a couple of hours. I know it's a few minutes, but let's just say a couple of hours. And they're going to sit around and you're going to pay them for an extra 6 months just for them to come up with that, right? So once you have that playbook designed, the next thing for you is the catalyst. Now, what is the catalyst? The catalyst is the part where you get to bring one expert in, maybe two, but one is good enough. The catalyst is to come in and really train the team on that particular playbook, right? You train them on that particular playbook. And sometimes the expert might even be in the company, or you can bring somebody from outside who comes in and maybe they'll take a week or two to train, even a month. And it might be somebody that you'll probably pay during that month. Maybe it'll cost you a few $1,000s because depending on how many people, how many departments that you have to train and whatnot, a lot of times it wouldn't even take a month to come and train them as far as the base of that playbook, as far as for get them to understand it at least at the fundamental or rudimentary level and how to go about the implementation of it. If you have a little bit of budget, you can have them to stick around while they lead the first stage of the implementation, which is basically a perfect segue into the whole handoff part of it that I'm going to talk about, which is the third part. Because once you have them, which I call the catalyst, of course, the person who comes in and connect the playbook and the employees together. Now the handoff part gets to come in. Now that handoff part is where that catalyst can stick around. It could be one, it could be two, it could be three, but it's still cheaper than a consulting firm, right? And it could also be maybe somebody you hired as a contractor. You know how sometimes they hire to say, oh, it's a 6 month contract or 3 month contract, right? There are people who do those short gigs, come in there and during that handoff period, that's when they do the training. They train the folks on how to implement this strategy, how to understand the playbook. Because the playbook is already written, it's carved out, it's probably stored in your document repository, whether it's Confluence or Azure, whatever it is, right? And train them on that and stick around maybe for the first, let's say sprints, or let's say the first month or two, right? Or 3 months to make sure that the team is actually implementing that correctly and they have the foundation formed, the base is formed in terms of understanding the direction. Then you take off. From that point on, the team was there from the playbook design to the training as far as understanding the playbook itself and, perfecting the playbook. Then, of course, the handoff period where they've sat there and worked with somebody who knows what they're doing to be able to understand, to see how the implementation goes. Then they'll figure out if they need to make adjustments amongst themselves, or if you need some external help still, you can still bring that catalyst back in to come in and polish up a few things. That is a lot time saving, money saving, and it also it helps kick things off, like keep things rolling because the more time you're spending on discovery or implementation, which usually takes sometimes a year just to get those things done, that is time that you're losing in the market. That is time that you're wasting while your competitors are advancing. So I don't quite understand why. And I think companies are going in this direction. I think they're going to eventually find out. And I understand that companies just looking for somebody to put the blame on because if something goes wrong, they want to say, oh, well, the consulting firm that we has hired or the expert that we brought in could not deliver. So let's cancel that and bring in another expert. I've actually had a job before, like right when COVID started. I think I got that job actually a month before COVID started. And that company had used, because they were going through an agile transformation, and they used 3 consulting companies before that. All they ended up with was no significant movement, but thousands of dollars. I'm talking thousands of dollars in consulting fees that they had to pay. And not to brag or anything, but my stint there, the few months that I spent there was actually more resourceful to them because they saw the changes, because they told me about it. And not just I'm not talking about just the employees like the team. I'm talking about the leaders, the executives. They told me about it, how my strategy, my method was actually a lot smoother, easier, and it didn't cost them as much. It's because we have this notion that a consulting firm, one of the big guys, can come in, they know so much. Well, but one thing we forget to remember is that they hire somebody like me to do that job, but they will charge you $300 an hour. Meanwhile, a company can hire somebody like me, and I'm not saying that I'm up for hire. I'm not trying to put myself out like I'm looking for a job or anything. No, I'm just saying a company who can hire somebody like me and pay me, I don't know, probably less than $100, bring me on a payroll and have me execute on those, because that's what I'm going to do anyway. It's no different from what I'm going to do, because either you pay me, let's say $100 an hour to do that, or you go pay one of the big guys $350 an hour, and I'm going to deliver to you the same thing that I'm going to deliver if you paid me $100 an hour, right? So I think that model is dying, and it's going to die tremendously, and it's time to disrupt it. I think the companies know it themselves, and that's why they themselves are reverting to AI. Because back in the day, they used to go and do research. Now they don't have to do research anymore because AI is doing it. They're already doing it. In fact, I recently worked with one of them. I used AI a lot in my job. That's how I knew it's due for disruption. Most of my job, like 80% of my job, was done by AI. Probably 85 or 90% was done by AI. So what difference does it make if companies can just go straight and get people who can facilitate, right? And can basically, speed up the process of some of these implementations or strategies or whatever it is. I don't, I think we're getting there. And I think consulting companies can smell it. They know things are going to go bad, but then again, they're banking on that quote unquote fear factor, the fear factor from executives and companies. Because if an executive go and hire somebody, let's say hire me to come in and help them implement their AI strategy, and it fails, they might lose their job because they were the ones who brought me in. But if they hire somebody else, like a company, to come in, they'll be like, oh, but we hired the big guys, it failed. So because approving the budget for the big guys goes beyond just one manager, it goes to like VPs, or hell, depending on the size of the company, maybe a CEO level, depending on the size of the company, how much they're going to spend on that. So it's easy to say, well, we all contributed to bringing that person in. Right. And also, you get consulting companies to do the dirty work for you too, because when you're trying to do something that requires change, a lot of managers, a lot of employees are going to push back on change and everything. And you need somebody to really micromanage the implementation of it. So you think bringing in somebody with a company or the big brand behind them will help push that around, and the people will be more less susceptible to resistance, as opposed to just bringing an individual. But I don't think that is the case, because today, I think people will resist change regardless of who is trying to implement the change. I think everybody loves some kind of change. It's just how you bring the change. Because I've seen employees rebel against consulting firms. I've seen employees work with consulting firms. It's all about the individual and how they want to bring about the change. Being like spending thousands, hundreds of thousands. Now, if you're major corporations, like the guys who have a market cap of 200, $300 billion, yes, they can go around and throw in $250,000 in consulting fees. That works for them. But what about that company that makes, that's a $15 million company, a $40 million company, a $50 million company? They don't have 200, 300,000 for consulting firm. They like to be lean. They like to be nimble, and they like to move faster because they don't have a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy. And I think instead of thinking consulting, look at it in that direction. That is just how I think things will go. And this industry is so ripe for disruption. And I see it crumbling. Give it another few years now. It's still going to exist, but I think it's going to take a major hit once companies realize we can save money and still speed up our process. And our cycle time and lead time will be a lot faster.